to the show, Andrew Atkin. Appreciate you having on, and I've seen a bit of your work on Twitter, and think it's quite interesting. So, was interested to have a discussion. So, yeah, thank you. Welcome.
Good, happy to be here.
So yeah, I guess just to start off, the brief introduction of your background and who you are.
hmm Basically, I'm just a blogger who's been interested in politics for years. Used to be a member of the ACT Party. I seem to produce a lot of interest from them with my housing affordability stuff back in the day, about I don't know, 7 years ago or something. But other than that, as far as my background goes, my personal professional background is basically just menial jobs. At the moment, I lost my job at the airport due to COVID, and then I moved on to be a bus driver for now, which I thought would be nice and happily easy, but it's not. So yeah, that's my position at the moment.
Interesting.
Very,
So,
very briefly.
what were you doing at the airport?
All sorts of stuff associated with parking and their operations there.
Fascinating.
Basically.
That's an interesting background. So you what were you doing in the ACT Party? Were you
I
advising?
I was a member of the ACT Party at one stage, and basically I ended up getting effectively, although I left independently, effectively kicked out because on the members forum I made a statement. I made a fake ACT ad just to bring attention to my idea, and I said, "Don't duplicate it. It's a fake ad." Blah blah blah. Associated with the idea that I don't believe that people who are a severe psychological mess should be allowed to go on to have kids if we know that they're almost certainly going to abuse them horrifically, basically. And they went mental over that because that, concept of restricting fertility for anyone to them is just totally sacrilegious, no matter what the reasons are. So I'll spare the tedious drama all around that, but that was the end of me and the ACT Party.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So they didn't like what you said in a certain respect, and then you didn't.
Yeah.
Did they not give you a
I
chance
think
to explain yourself, or?
I did sort of explain myself, but I think the excuse was that I had the cheek to make an artificial ad, because I just sort of have this attitude that if you don't basically stick out and create something that brings attention to something, it'll just be completely ignored. So I don't mind being a bit of a provocative type person.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that was used as an excuse to try and shuffle me out, because at the end of the day, all these institutional political parties getting elected is number one. And one thing I noticed about ACT from my experience with them is that they're absolutely terrified of whatever the media is going to do to them.
Fascinating. Okay. Well,
When
fascinating.
I was there, they're totally preoccupied with the media. Like, they had their ideals and all the rest of it, but after everything they said, it was like, how will the media react to this? Because it's like they knew that the media was holding a gun to their head, and as soon as they give them the media the opportunity to turn them into some kind of quasi-Nazi party or anything like that, racist or anything. I mean, you know what they're like. They would run with it. So they were like scared little chickens, terrified of what the media would do. At the time, they were like that, and it was.
That's
It's
actually
like,
when I think
trying
about
to.
it, that's actually not a bad position to be in, really, because you have to be careful about because the media has so much influence. That's something I've been learning, that the media really
Oh, hell
does
yes.
have, yeah, for sure, a huge influence over the perception
I
of
mean,
the party.
but well, I think it's more than a huge influence. I think they're virtually dictators. I hate to say it. I mean, truth is, you can make anyone look however which way you want just by leaving out one or two critical details.
Yeah, totally.
Letting
Yeah,
them.
100%. Like, I think
And
definitely.
you could be perfect. You could be so the public could love you for what you are, and if the media just says, "Oh, we'll just show them that bit there," and they know damn well the public's going to generate a totally false assumption, and they have that incredible power of discretion. Only
Yeah,
Trump can punch through the media.
yeah. Well, he
From
did,
what I've seen.
and
Yeah.
I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that situation, because I think, well, for me, that was a situation where the he punched through it, and he kind of exposed, maybe for the first time for many people, just how much the media does manipulate the narrative and lie.
He did. Was so good. Like he's so childishly blunt with the way he talks, and people go, "Oh, this unsophisticated person." But so much of what he said was just the plain truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he had the thing is, he had the power of the internet to have his say, rather than be totally victim to media discretion how he's interpreted. If he didn't have the ability to have his say and have his comeback, where more than a handful of people would receive it, I think he would have just been ripped to pieces by the media, completely ripped to pieces. But he had enough fame, enough status, and enough power as an independent to punch through that. I think that's one of the most remarkable things about Trump or his episode, is that I see him as like the only guy that took on the media and actually won. He actually got a term as president.
Yeah, totally. There's lots of stats that came out showing how he got lots of free advertising essentially from them, and he played them.
Mm. He did. I mean, people think that he's a racist to things, because, I mean, I could so relate to what he was doing. Like when his first comments about the border where he said, these guys coming over, they're racists, or what did he say? They're murderers and rapists, and some of them I hear are nice people. And when he says that, does he really believe that? He knows it's only a minority, possibly, that are doing that. But if he doesn't make these awful, grotesque, blunt statements to start off with, he doesn't get hurt at all. That's the world we live in.
Well, that comment was misconstrued, really, wasn't it?
It was at first. Like, he knew that the media would throw it up in horror.
Mm.
But then followed through with it afterwards. And people thought he was so disgusting for making those comments, but he wasn't. He was just doing what he had to do to make himself visible, to throw the whole issue on the table, which he did. I mean, I think people see him as being much more vulgar than he really is. Really, it's just his technique to grab attention. You see what I mean? And he knows that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he isn't really that. I don't really think he's that bad. I mean, it was entertaining more than anything. He brought a lot of attention to the political scene. I think a lot of people were just bored and sick of.
Exactly.
Well, that's. I mean, it's interesting for sure, and it's also interesting to know about your history with ACT and why they and your relations. So, were you a list MP? Were you?
No. I was a member of the PUN, but at one stage they were asking for people to stand as candidates,
right?
And I didn't do it because I thought it would have been a waste of time, and it would have been a waste of time.
Yeah.
I was basically just in the members forum because that was at the point where it was below 1%. You know what I mean?
Right.
The party thought it was almost extinct.
Yeah.
But David Seymour was leading it, and it was trying to build up from there. But. Yeah,
are they?
I was only in there for probably like a few months. I left because, to me, I mean, I've got a bit of a. Probably wouldn't be so extreme nowadays, but I have a bit of a bottom line, and that is, I expect any political party to be realistic about the facts of what we know on child abuse and the impact that it has on people in society. It's so huge and so powerful that to ignore it means, to me, that you're simply not prepared to be realistic.
Hey, look,
on levels that truly matter.
Hey, look, I'm getting a bit of bad audio from. It's still not really. It's just cutting out and it's making not really great sounds. Would it be okay to continue on the phone? I know that you have limited. But that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Doesn't worry me at all. Okay, I'm gonna give you a phone call now.
Brilliant.
Okay?
Remember to block your ID.
That's right.
Yeah,
just give me 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, all good.
We'll sort that out.
Thank you for that. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about the trouble.
Okay. Are you there?
Hi there. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Yeah. Thank you for calling, and really just wanted to say really appreciate you calling up, and I think it's been a great discussion so far. And you'll hear on the upload, once I upload the stream, that the audio just wasn't. It was quite hard to listen to at that stage. Yeah.
No, It's all right. I was prepared for it. I thought it might happen. I think a lot of it's because I've got this really crap old computer that needs an update.
Yeah, no, all
Yeah.
good. So yeah, I guess okay. So I got a question here. What got you into interested in writing, and what kind of kicked it off? Do you think?
I think I've always had a disposition to be interested in politics. I mean, interested in social issues. I don't know. It's so in my nature that, God, it's hard to even find a beginning to it. You
So
know
when
what I mean?
so when did you start? Did you? How
Oh,
old?
when did I start making my blog? That blog goes back to... Ooh, that's a good question, actually. I can have a look at it on my computer. It'll take me 2 seconds.
Yeah, all good.
Probably over 10 years.
Wow.
15 years I was writing these things.
Gee whiz.
Yeah.
That's pretty. And I was reading through a few of the articles and really interesting, like really thoughtful writing. And on a broad variety of topics. It's really fascinating and great to. Yeah, and so you also upload videos, I see, on your YouTube channel.
Yep. I've done the videos, a few videos here and there.
And
It's good fun.
yeah, you've got some good videos, and you also say here that you've got a podcast. Do you have a podcast as well?
Podcast? I don't...
It says on
No.
building. Oh, it says subscribe to my podcast. Maybe it's part of the. Yeah,
Ah. I don't know where that is.
it's on your
That
website.
sounds... my
On
website.
building Utopia on
Yeah.
on the page. Okay, that's all good. I just was just
I
wondering.
don't think so. I don't know why it says that. I'll have to have a look at it.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, I saw something you wrote on free speech and how you're talking about perhaps fighting back using the same tactics, and I was interested in.
Yeah.
And yeah, what's your position on, I guess, or what do you think of the hate speech laws that the government's trying to bring in?
To me, it's very, very simple. If what they're doing with hate speech laws, at the end of the day, is they're creating the legal infrastructure to shut down free speech at their discretion, and that is an absolute screaming no-no. You just do not go there. Because it doesn't matter what their intentions are, the only thing that matters in the end, the thing that really matters, is what laws are in place, get put in place, and what they mean. So my position is I'm absolutely opposed to hate speech laws.
Yeah.
Basically. I mean, yeah, if people are being shockingly abusive, there are other ways to deal with that, I suppose. Like
Yeah.
maybe expose them, but yeah.
Like freedom of association is a good one, right? You can
Yeah,
disassociate
freedom of
with
what?
you can disassociate with people that are abusive.
Yes. Or if it's harassment, if you can't disassociate from them, they just keep on coming at you harassment and you ask them to, then maybe that's a different story. I could imagine that, that could be there could be a legal thing with that. But when it comes to expressing objective views, that has to be protected as much as possible. And already, as far as freedom of speech goes, I think we've lost it to a huge degree because people are so afraid of expressing certain views, and they say, oh, you better not say that, you better keep it to yourself because it'll piss these people off, or people will think this or that.
Mm.
I mean, we talk about it like it's just normal and we accept it.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I think you have real freedom of speech when everybody understands that just because a person has a view that you don't like or you think is wrong, that should not translate in your mind, in your assumptions, to them being a bad person. It doesn't mean that necessarily. You need to draw that very, very sharp line, and we've lost that line, I think, and because of that, people are afraid to say what they have to say.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that like what you're talking about with self censorship is a big issue, especially and it's a strange thing because we have social media now, and you'd think that people are more free than ever to express themselves. But I see it a lot with people wanting to preserve their employability, and especially with cancel culture, a lot of people are scared to even have a political opinion because of the implications it might mean for their job.
Yes, that's right. I mean, and I can understand that. Like, if I was in a more high up sort of executive position, there's no way I would write half the stuff that I write. I mean, but what does that tell you?
Yeah.
And yeah.
And so,
but the only people that are free to speak are the people who have got nothing to lose. Basically, they're the only ones that have freedom of speech. For the most part.
Well, that's bang on. That's right on the money, I think, actually, because, and also, like, would you say there's an element of, like, people that are preoccupied with life, like having a family and having a job, and maybe that's a common theme among people that are interested in politics and produce.
Absolutely. Well, I think that when people are taking care of a mortgage and kids and all that sort of thing, they're in a mental mode where they just want to hold the fort. You know what I mean?
Mm.
They don't want to go asking for trouble and difficulties, especially if they've got a crazy mortgage and they cannot afford to lose their jobs. Which is probably huge numbers of people out there. So everybody's scared of consequences, and for understandable reasons as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, do you see any, like, I guess we touched on the mortgages. I think that's a interesting topic to come back to. But do you see any solution for how we can stimulate or maybe encourage freedom of speech in New Zealand?
Well, I like what the Free Speech Union is doing. They're doing my idea, as it looks, well, crudely my idea. That is, they are looking at fighting back. So if someone, slanders you for having a view that they don't like, they think, oh, therefore you're a racist, and we're going to tell the world you're a racist and your employer, and scare your employer into being associated with you, because you've got this cloud of ugly doubt hanging over your head that we've created.
Yeah.
I think what they're doing is really good, pushback, because who knows, if you can throw it straight back at them, 90% of these people are probably cowards. That'll probably stop them from doing what they're doing straight off the mark, just knowing that you're going to punch back.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think what they're doing there is good. But I also think that you need to advertise to the public what freedom of speech means and how we should relate to it. Like the great example I like, the one that people can relate to, is the Holocaust denial, for example. I mean, I'm not a Holocaust denier. I mean, I don't even care about that issue. But the example is, like, if someone objectively believes that there are big question marks associated with the Holocaust to the point where you could call them a Holocaust denier, that doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just might mean they're wrong. Yeah. But we should stop. We should never dare call someone a bad person for having a view that we don't like. Because if that view is reached objectively, then even if it's wrong, that's completely secondary. They should still be respected as an honourable person, even, as I say, even if they're wrong. And we need to get that attitude and mentality into our society. I mean, that's the way academia was once upon a time supposed to think as well. It was like, it wasn't a safe space from freedom of speech, it was supposed to be a safe space for freedom of speech. And I think a part of that, what really gave it, traditionally anyway, freedom of speech, was that understanding. There's a big difference between a person's objectively held viewpoint. Well, their objectively held viewpoint has nothing specifically to do with who they are as a person, and it shouldn't reflect on their character, be they right or wrong. So there needs to be a cultural shift, a cultural understanding of that, which I think we're losing, because everyone's afraid of being called a Nazi and a racist and a bigot.
Well, totally.
Yeah.
Like, people have to need, like, it's the freedom to be able to discuss ideas, and not necessarily as if they're your beliefs, or even if they are your beliefs, you shouldn't be persecuted for your beliefs anyway.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, for example, I'm shocking. I believe that there's a place for population control when and as acquired. Because, objectively, I think ultimately we have no choice. You have to balance population to resources. The crudest of people could think that I'm a Nazi just for asserting that. It's...
Yeah, well, you're allowed to. I mean, I think it comes down to. I mean, I've talked to many people that I disagree with heavily on this show, and but it all comes down to the basic thing where I respect yours and everyone's right to freedom of speech. And so that means they can say whatever they want within as long as they're not promoting violence. And
Yeah.
but there's also connects to a broader point, which is what you're talking about, is that people have to respect, I guess, people's humanity. Would you say, like the collection of basic human rights? That is the way in which you respect people's humanity, right?
Well, yeah, and the key is to not assume that someone is a bad person and believes what they believe just because they want to be hateful, just because you don't like what they believe.
And so, what do you think about then cancel culture? Because I saw this article recently by one of the mainstream news places. They're targeting this guy, a brewery owner somewhere in New Zealand. He said something about Maori men that I wouldn't agree with as a generalisation, but he talked about how he in his opinion Maori men beat up their wives and stuff, and then essentially was then I guess you could say lynched in a sense by these massive media corporations. They pretty much doxed him. They announced his identity. They announced his work location. They announced his business. They in terms of this kind of cancellation like this, it's part of cancel. These are the themes of cancel culture. So what do you think about this cancel culture? And
that's a classic example. I mean, they've gone public with it and tried to make him look like an awful racist, obviously. But if he objectively believes that Māori men are much more likely to beat up their wives, then we have to assume he's saying that for entirely objective reasons until we have evidence otherwise. And he doesn't deserve to be demonised for that one bit, and he doesn't deserve to be cancelled. If he's wrong, no problem. Just explain how he's wrong. You know what I mean? Disagree with it. But I don't like it.
Well, for sure, but how can we? What can we people do? Like, is it a place for the free speech union to defend someone like him? And I guess just before you answer that, like one of the problems that I see with things like the free speech union is they try to be political. They're kind of like the ACT Party, like what you're talking about before. Like, what's one thing I noticed about the ACT Party is they didn't stand up and defend a whole lot of QAnon New Zealanders after they got kicked off Twitter. And so they can say that they want free speech, but when it comes to actually defending someone that, sure, I agree, they don't have views that they might necessarily want to associate with, but nonetheless, if you're going to defend free speech, you're guaranteed, it's inevitable that you're going to have to stand up for views that aren't popular, and this seems to be a kind of a force that makes free speech not popular in politics.
Yes, I mean, well, that's true. I mean, ACT Party, as a political party, and now they've got 10% of the vote, they are going to be much more politically calculated than they were before. You know what I mean? They've got so much more to lose. But, yeah, they're probably not. Well, they're not going to be completely objective. But I know what you're saying, and, yeah, you're absolutely right. If we're standing up for free speech, it's for everyone, no matter what they're saying.
And so this does seem to be like a mechanism that stops these groups, and even the Free Speech Union. Like, I'd be surprised if the Free Speech Union actually stand up for this guy that was talking about Maori men.
Well, if they don't, then you're right. They're gutless if they don't, because, well, you know what? He's probably right, because as a statistical group, it is true that there is way more abuse in Māori society, and with Māoris and Islanders, there's a heck of a lot more abuse and child abuse in the home. It's just, but that as a statistical group, as far as we know. So does that mean that they're punching up their wives more often? Probably, but I don't know specifically. Sorry, that's getting a bit off a bit. But even if that's wrong, even if his presumption is wrong, the Free Speech Union should be sticking up for him. Maybe they're afraid not to do it, like what you're suggesting, is that, oh, hello, they're sticking up for racists, therefore they're a racist organisation.
Yeah.
And so that just, proves my point of how the lack of free speech really does work.
Yeah. Well, that's what I fear.
I'm terrified of being demonised. Yeah.
Totally. And then how can that natural obstacle for freedom of speech be overcome on a mass scale, like for these big institutions, would you say?
all I can think of is fighting fire with fire, and that is every time someone calls you a Nazi or whatever, pull them up for it and demonize them back. Write an article and have it filed so it's easily accessed for anyone who's concerned. Put the names up there and give it straight back to them for being slanderers. That's the best I can think of doing, because it's until we've just got to. The only thing I can think of is giving it straight back to them, because we can't write laws to shut them up. You know what I mean? So
totally. Well,
it has to be exposure, an effective, promoted exposure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like these media companies that do this targeting cancel culture and stuff like this do have to be held to account. And I mean, my approach was personally with this issue was just to create underground networks that are not censorable by the government and by these media people. But I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the government is a lot more powerful than I think the general people realise. So they can censor anyone, really. But yeah, I was wondering. I guess another question would be, what in general? You've written a lot about different topics, but what are the general I guess free speech might come up, but what are the general philosophical, societal, maybe even generational problems that you see in this country?
Oh, okay. I see lots of things, but the housing issue is something that I've been beating on about for about 15 years, while Owen McShane was still around. You heard of him? That one?
No. Oh, McShane.
Oh, God. I think he's been dead for at least 10 years now, I think. He died a little while ago. But he's quite a prominent New Zealander, well known at the time. He had a real problem with what was going on with urban planning back in the day.
What was his name?
Owen McShane.
Oh, Owen McShane. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm just getting sidetracked here what I was talking about. But basically, what we've done is we've created a locked-in undersupply of land for housing.
Yeah.
Because we won't allow it. We won't allow cities to expand properly in response to demand. Now, what that means is that you've created a bidding war from hell on something very, very fundamental that people need. And when that happens, you end up with people bidding with whatever disposable money they have to not be the guy that misses out, and someone has to miss out. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what's happened on land, and so $40,000 sections on the fringes are now more like $400,000, $500,000, $600,000
Yeah.
The more money you put in the bidding war, the more financially fuel you put into it, the higher the prices go, because we're not allowing the land to expand out. That's putting it very simply. There's also a land banking dynamic which amplifies it, but basically that's what happens. So we've got all these young people paying $800,000 or whatever crazy amount it is for house and land packages that should be more like $200,000. We got rid of the insane regulatory regime, and these prices are so high that it's delaying fertility. They have no choice, or they're choosing not to have kids at all because so much money has gone into that mortgage.
Yeah.
The reason governments know exactly what's going on. They know that they're only pretending to solve the problem. They've been only pretending to solve the problem, right back in John Key's time,
yeah,
when he was the minister. But that's because you've got probably about 2/3 of voters own a home and they only want to see the price go up. And of those 2/3 of voters, they're also much more likely to vote, those homeowners. They are the untouchables, politically speaking. And
Wow.
they don't, because they absolutely don't want to see house prices fall, our governments have only been pretending to solve the problem. That is horrific, and it has a massive, massive impact on what I consider to be the most important class of any society, and that is the young, fertile generation, because they're bringing in the next generation. So that really is our number one problem right now. That's what I think there.
Yeah. And so it's interesting what you're talking about with the fact that there's a political motivation to keep the status quo.
Yeah. Carry on. Sorry.
Well, do you not think that there is the political maybe appetite to see this problem being solved at the moment?
Uh, Look, even the ACT Party won't stand up, and they're supposed to be all about housing affordability on a more realistic level. You will never see them stand up and declare, we want house prices to collapse by 70%, because bang, they're out. They do that. And they know it. So even though they know that the situation is a pigsty, it is basically intergenerational theft. It's to be dead honest about what's going on. Even though they know they cannot go there, and they can't do it. And if that can't do it, none of them can.
And so would you say that artificial land scarcity is one of them? Like, I mean, there's many elements to the housing crisis, but would you say that's the biggest element to it?
It is the biggest element because it throws on about $400,000 on the cost of your house alone. Even like fringe land is supposed to be rural cost, and that means unserviced section should be probably around about $10,000-$15,000 for an 1/8 acre or 1/4 acre section.
Yeah.
It should be nothing.
Yeah,
that's how much, because that's what true rural value is. If we didn't have artificial land zoning, the metropolitan urban limits, rural urban boundaries, whatever you want to call it, we would once again be allowed to build houses on land that cheap.
Yeah.
And what that does is it allows you to build houses. As soon as the price of houses go up, you end up with a building boom. Because, the builders take the little bit of extra money. Of course they're going to build more houses. And that there produces the natural supply response, which makes it impossible for houses to inflate too much.
Yeah.
It really is as simple as that. But you're absolutely right. There's huge other factors in it as well. But when you create lock out the supply of land, so that's, as it's called in economist talk, inelastic supply, that is more demand does not lead to the generation of more supply, then if you all of a sudden find a way to build houses for, say, $50,000, the houses and the service section and all the other stuff, insanely cheap, $50,000 for that, the house land package will still sell for $800,000 because that extra money people get in their pocket from not having to pay for the building gets piled into more land price inflation because that ruthless bidding war on land has gone nowhere. So that's why I stress the land factor, not only because it's such a major expense, but because until you sort out the land, until you create elastic supply, not inelastic supply in land, you're basically doing the proverbial to the wind.
Fascinating. That's a great point, actually. That, thank you for that. It's a really important issue there. So I guess I don't want to take up, because you've got limited, I don't want to take up all your minutes, but
I don't care about that.
Okay. Oh, okay. That's
I'm
good.
Not poor. Okay.
Oh, great. That's good. Yeah. Well, I guess maybe more on the housing then. Because I've thought about it myself as well a bit, and for sure land scarcity is a big issue. Another topic, I mean, some mechanisms that I saw, I mean, of course, building regulation needs to become, like, it's weird. It's weird to see councils not being incentivized to consent to buildings. The common theme is that they take forever and they drag their feet and they pick up tiny issues, and regulation gets worse and worse. But also another major factor I saw with the housing crisis was the barrier to entry for first homeowners. So the fact that people have to raise in the private capital markets, they have to raise a large deposit, not unnecessarily, not unreasonably large, I'd say, but that seems to be the biggest barrier to entry. And then also the fact that that people can pay rent. So people that are paying rent every week, that doesn't seem to be proof of, or that doesn't seem to be able to be used as a proof that they are able to service a loan with that same amount of money. So what do you think about rent to own schemes? Like I think when I was researching it, that seemed to be a big mechanism for reducing barriers to entry for first home buyers.
I haven't looked into that at any great level. Like, my really big interest, or overwhelming, is simply how much does it cost to build a new house?
Yeah.
Because whether you're doing rent to own or anything like that, remember that hardcore bidding war is still there.
Yeah.
And whatever you do to make it easier for people to get onto the housing ladder, through any kind of subsidisation or whatever, it'll ultimately, it's like the carrot on the end of the donkey. The more money there is to inflate the market, directly or indirectly, the more inflated the market becomes.
So it's just a race to the top.
Well, for young people, I mean, if I was to make a recommendation, I have to say get out of the country. I don't want to say that, but I have to.
Yeah, I saw that article about
Australia,
going to Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what, probably about 70-80% of our politicians would agree with that, but of course they'll never say it. It's totally unpatriotic.
Yeah.
But if you want to create a life for yourself, it's just got so insane now that you have to take a deep breath and say, well, hey, Brisbane's only 5 hours away. I can come back and jump on a plane every now and then and visit mum. You know what I mean? Keep it or whatever.
Yeah.
Australia's virtually New Zealand if you're on their east coast.
Yeah.
So you really do have to ask yourself if you want to base your life here the way it is right now, because I think that people think, oh, how wonderful, we finally got these young people on the ladder. But it's like, God, do you want to be on the ladder paying that kind of a mortgage, and in a market which could collapse any time, and it really could.
And so what would happen if the market collapsed? Like, what happens to people that own a mortgage, let's say, I don't know, $500,000, and it collapses and then your house is worth less than that?
$500,000 house and it collapses all the way down to, let's say, $200,000.
Yeah.
But they're going to get depressed if they're working incredibly hard to service that mortgage and they watch all their net worth disappear. But they will have the same house and the same mortgage, so in terms of immediate living standards, it won't have gone anywhere, but they'll be depressed, I suppose, about that situation. And many people, I would imagine, would just throw in the towel and declare bankruptcy or whatever.
Well, would they have to... that would be... Would declaring bankruptcy solve that issue? I guess they'd have their house taken off them, wouldn't they?
Mortgagee sales all over the place.
Yeah.
To me, look, you cannot solve... This is just it. This is why it's so political. You cannot solve this problem now with what we've done, this horrendous cancer, without a big, fat, nasty, bloody, painful operation. There's going to be tears. But the thing that I say is that there has to be tears, because every year that goes past, it's another, I don't know how many, a few thousand people that have to take on a ridiculous mortgage which stuffs up their ability to have kids or seriously interferes with it.
Yeah.
So every time someone takes on a $700,000 mortgage that's young, they should already be crying. You see what I mean?
Oh, totally. I 100% agree. And
we have to do it, because if your society can't breed in a healthy way, how do you want to define dysfunctional, failed society?
Yeah.
So it's about priorities at the end of the day.
And so that kind of moves on to the topic of mortgages, and it's kind of, I think it's well established that New Zealand is quite heavily in debt, in private debt, and a lot in houses, and I guess because of the inflated housing market. That's, I think, what do you think about the fact that a lot of people are heavily in debt, and I mean, you're talking about how it already does have an impact on society, but is there is there a broader sense that it impacts society? Would you say that people being heavily in debt in common?
Well, I'm not heavily in debt at all, but when I try to imagine myself being heavily in debt, it's like I would hate it, because I would hate to be in a position where I feel like I cannot ultimately give my employer the middle finger if I really need to.
Yeah.
You're afraid. You're afraid because you could lose everything. And one thing I will say, though, this is how I think properties, having all these people on insane mortgages does perversely help economic development. But that is, before you're a mortgage slave, you're a tax slave. You have to earn those tax dollars to pay off your mortgage, of course.
Yeah.
And if you've got if you and your partner have a $700,000 house, you're both working 40 hours a week, and that's not going to change. So get working, get paying all of that tax. Whereas if you had a $200,000, $150,000 house, all of a sudden, your wife, if your wife wants to stay home and take care of the kids, or just be a housewife doing a part-time job or something, that option's there. So you get less productivity and less tax. So it turns us into tax slaves.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating because that touches on two topics that I've picked up from some of your work. And you commented about tax slavery. And I think it's an interesting topic that people are kind of becoming more aware of because of the fact that we do essentially have almost a 50% tax when you include all the different types of taxes that we are taxed on. I mean, how, I guess, just in terms of ethics and even maybe freedom, like in terms of freedom, like what do you think about the current taxation rates in New Zealand and the fact that
50%, 50% is enormous. It's absolutely enormous compared to historic rates going back, I don't know, decades and centuries. But the morality of it, I don't know. It's probably incredibly difficult to work out how to carve up the pie. But all I can say is, looking at it from a political viewpoint, we've got so many old people now, retired people, who just live for ages, very expensive on the health system, and very expensive pensions, and there's a lot of them to take care of. And also it takes a long time for a kid to turn into a productive member of society now, because they all seem to go off to university to do their probably vanity degrees, which aren't really worth anything, but they do it anyway. So the ratio between producers and consumers is very low. Well, not really, because now it's mum and dad doing the producing, not just dad. So that's the way it's all shifted. Mm. And to support that structure, we've got huge taxes. Is that ideal? I certainly think it could do with some very aggressive tweaking. But the morality of it, I really don't know. I haven't thought about it too much on that level.
Yeah, I mean, just like from a personal perspective, like myself, like it's demoralizing having taxation levels so high, and it disencourages you from succeeding, I think. Would you say?
That's a fact. That's an economic fact, because we know that, actually, believe it or not, when you reduce tax rates, if you do it properly, and this has been observed here and there all over the place, you can actually, believe it or not, get more tax, because the less you tax people, the more happy they are to work harder, work longer hours, and therefore earn more money to be taxed in the first place. See what I mean?
For sure.
You can actually get a higher tax take by reducing taxes. So, I mean, there's no doubt about it. High tax rates put people off. It's well known. If you would cut taxes, if you go from a minimalist, especially corporate taxes as well, it incentivizes more capital investment, and capital investment is the foundation that makes you increases productivity per capita. The most simple way I put it is replacing handsaws with chainsaws, which means capital investment and therefore gives you more productivity. It's poison. There's no doubt about that. You won't find too many economists that would disagree with that, I think. So you're right. Yeah.
Why do you think we're being taxed so heavily? Do you think it's? I mean, there's obviously a lot of government waste, which is horrendous.
Yep.
But like, what do you think is the general because
old people. I don't mean to beat up on old people, retired people, but from what I understand, our overwhelming welfare cost is old people, the pension, and also healthcare. The last 6 years of their life, they really hammer that health system big time.
Would you? I mean, I'd be interesting to see It'd be interesting to see the numbers on it, because I saw that the public sector is quite a huge component of that as well. Would you agree?
I think I've seen graphs on that before, but I can't remember the specifics. But it's got to be huge. I mean, I'm not too sure, but I do know that the lion's share is retired people.
Yeah. I think
So I can't remember the specifics on that. But
yeah. Well, I don't know if it'll be interesting to see the stats on it, because I think just from, I guess it's kind of my opinion as well, that I think the public sector is probably grossly inflated with workers.
I totally agree. It will be.
Yeah.
These massive bureaucracies, you ask yourself, we never needed them in the past. You go back, I don't know, 70, 80 years, the public sector was tiny, we all got on with our lives, no problem.
For sure. Well, that brings up the what you're talking about with the United States of NZ, but I'll go to that. I'll just touch on that later on. I just wanted to touch on the other thing you were talking about with the mums, like mums being able to stay at home, which was a traditional thing, and the fact that our society shifted to both parents working and sorry, my words are coming out badly. The implications of that for, I guess, our culture and the economic side of our society. But I also saw something you posted about feminism and how feminism relates to Western depopulation. So yeah, what are your thoughts on I guess feminism and depopulation and the fact that parents are mums are working a lot of the time now, are not able to take care of their kids at home?
When you look at so many of the movements, and this is something that I've said many times over, so many of the social movements that have happened from about 1950s onward, it all points in the direction of suppressing fertility with its effect. And you have to ask yourself, was that deliberate? I don't know. I don't want to look like a silly conspiracy theorist, but it's something that I've always pondered. Because you have to look at the baby boom. Go back to the baby boom. How would have governments reacted after their studies on the situation? They would have screamed population panic. They would have thought, if we keep on going like this, we're going to total the world, screw up the world. So who knows? Maybe people behind the scenes decided to drive on a cultural level some changes to interfere with the traditions that supported high fertility. Possibly, I don't know, because feminism has had a big role to play in encouraging women to get out there and basically live like men, go for the career and all that sort of thing. And when they're working hard in their careers, they're not pushing out too many babies, are they? As we know. But it's just a pondering that. It's like my great suspicion.
Yeah.
That's where things point. But I don't want to say, it was specifically done for that purpose, because I don't know. Yeah. But it's interesting, though. I mean, our fertility rates in New Zealand apparently have collapsed to 1.6 children per woman. That's slow-burning, intergenerational social suicide, isn't it?
Well, yeah, below 2 is social suicide, isn't it?
Below 2.1 to be exact.
Right.
Yeah, that's the replacement.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I just on that topic, I mean, my suspicion is that feminism has a strange relationship with Marxism, and the Marxists are notoriously against the family unit, and they try to unite with any kind of allegiances that they can. And just with my experience in university, the females were heavily feminized or like indoctrinated into feminism, and just from what I experienced.
The Marxist link, I do not know. I think, as my wild pondering, I think if there's a deep state behind the scenes, and I certainly don't dismiss that as a possibility, then I think that Marxism is probably just another tool in the toolbox to drive forward whatever effect they want. And if I was to take my best guess as to what effect it is that they're trying to achieve, it's population control. I mean, you can't put it off the table and say, oh, what a ridiculous idea. Just look at China. Look at what they did with their population panic, 1 child per person. Boom. Is our academic deep state, which is basically just the public service that researches things, do they never take population control seriously either?
Yeah, it's strange, and there's different narratives as well. Like I've definitely heard different narratives that we need to, in New Zealand, we need to try and grow the population as much as we can. But yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I wanted to talk about it's a great post, and I saw it's one of the things that kind of got me interested in your work was your publication on the United States of New Zealand, about
Yes.
how like a way to decentralize the government and the power, I guess, the maybe hold and to have competing states that compete on how well they do as a governing system.
Absolutely.
So
You create a hothouse competition, and I went as far as saying that would be the end of politics as we know it. Courageously.
Well, I've got a bunch of questions because it's fascinating. And so where were what's this number 16 or like the 16 states come from?
I pulled it out of my ass. It could be 20 or it could be 10. I think it should be at least 10.
Okay,
Arbitrary.
so it wasn't to do with perhaps like the districts.
Yeah, I think it was. I wasn't even trying to be precise, basically.
Right.
But I thought any number above 10 will give you some pretty bloody good competition. Like if we chopped ourselves up into 10 different microstates with a very, very small federal head, so that federal head, Wellington, is maybe taking only 1 or 2% of the tax base, so it's pathetic. And every single microstate took care of its own welfare systems, prisons, everything like that. Then as soon as one of those states does something right, we're all going to know about it. We're all going to go to our own local government and say, what are you doing? We've just identified what best practices. We expect you to be doing that too. Where they succeed, where they fail, we'll all know about it. And so just the law of competition would drive better standards for everyone and would be the end of politics. And every state would have to work very hard to hold on to its people. Otherwise, they'll just bugger off to a better state.
Do you think
I just think, why not?
Do you think that New Zealand's big enough? Because I guess my concern is that 16 or the number of states would be quite important, because you've got to have enough population to be able to, I guess, service them their own service their own infrastructure.
Personally, I think you can make it 100 states if you wanted to. I think you can chop it right down. I mean, servicing infrastructure is no big deal. And the thing is, here's another thing as well. Say you've got, to be pretty dramatic about it, 100 states, and they all want to buy a whole lot of machinery or whatever to do certain big jobs. Then, 10 of those 100 states can still work together to collectivize for certain things. Just collaborate.
I guess, like, on the extreme end of the argument, like, you could say, what if you just did 2 states? So you had the North Island, and are you aware of the South Island independence movement?
Yes, I am.
So there's an argument. I mean, I personally, like, I don't know, I won't share my, like, my opinions aren't really relevant, but yeah, so they're, I don't know exactly what their argument or what they're wanting, but I guess you could use that example of having the North Island and the South Island as 2 different states.
There's only one problem with it. They'll both be if you did that with just 2 states, they'll both probably be perfectly useless in the same way, and there'll be no change. The beauty of having, the more you have, the more openness you have to natural experimentation, for better and worse, that everyone can learn from. If you've got at least 10, then you've got some really good, juicy competition cranking. And again, competition in the commercial sense is not really about creating winners and losers. It always ultimately means raising standards for everyone and finding what works best for everyone. So the only qualm I have with the South Island independence movement, although I think it's a good idea in itself, is that it needs to go so much further in principle.
And so what's your vision for, so these states would be the state level government, and then there'd be a federal level government that's only does it's extremely limited to the fundamentals.
Limited to what is truly necessary, what really makes sense for a federal government, like a standardized passport system with biometrics, so everyone can seamlessly trade within the New Zealand states, or things like that. Or where,
so a national identity.
Administrative economies of scale makes sense, or anything like that. But for the huge lion's share of the stuff of everyday life, that can be taken care of locally. That's excellent efficiency.
So are you talking about almost expanding the district councils into district parliaments?
Yeah, they'll assume those roles. Absolutely.
And then then Wellington or the Beehive becomes the federal state that then
Maybe Wellington Central or a part of it becomes our own little Washington DC that is staunchly impetised. So again, it's in the model I'm thinking of. The federal government will be almost politically irrelevant. It will have virtually no power. It will have 1 or 2% of the tax base.
and so the federal, because there are basic there's fundamentals to government. So the federal government would be minting the currency, and would be in charge of the military, and all the.
True, although there's yes, because that's where collectivisation within the states makes sense for a military, something like that. If you ever did need a big military, then hey, yeah, fair enough. Maybe you need to crank it up to 2 or 3% of the tax base or whatever. But for all the functions that basically, federal government will take care of all the stuff that really does make sense for a federal government to do, and then that is it. So that's the model I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like our politics is so dysfunctional that I think it makes people think of that there does need to be an alternative. And I mean, I guess, but what I do I guess like about our current system is that it's a very flat government. Like, you literally talk to one person, your representative, and then that's your voice in the national parliament. Now the problem is that we don't really seem to have there's no really representatives don't have a duty to represent you. They can just ignore you if you want. And I don't know, for whatever reason, that's been my experience in a lot of situations. But yeah, what do you think about, I guess, the role of representatives and maybe how that would fit into this model that you're talking about?
Well, the way I see our politicians is, if the real world of politics is a supermarket, then they're the checkout girls taking your order. They're just dildos blowing in the wind, taking our order, and trying to get re-elected. So that's all they are. I don't take them seriously at all. I really, really don't. If you speak to them personally, they will compassionately listen to everything that you're saying, but when you walk out the door, after they do a quick evaluation on its political relevance or irrelevance, whether or not they think it's going to give them more support, if they think it's not, they'll throw it in the bin. Everything you said, and forget everything that you said. I think that's how they have to be to survive.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. And so do you think that the role of representatives needs to be changed? And I guess in terms of they have a duty or maybe even an oath to serve the wishes of the majority wishes of their constituents. So let's say 10 people tell them one thing and then 5 people tell them another thing. They by law have to side with the 10 people, for example.
That sounds a bit like direct democracy, and they're just an agent to direct democracy.
For sure, exactly.
I really don't know about that. I mean, me personally, I'm not attracted to that idea, because the hard truth is the vast majority of people don't know. Governments have to be a little bit arrogant sometimes, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Otherwise your society won't function, and I think public service and governments often take that principle to an extreme and justify their arrogance with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the law of competition introduced to government through many microstates, to me, I see it as the only long-term solution to bad government.
Mm.
Because I don't have a huge amount of faith in people voting for all the right things. Because I think that we should actually have a license before we're allowed to vote.
Mm.
And like, anyone should be allowed to vote, but you should have to do a basic course on politics and basic economics and pass it, before you have a license to vote and allowed to vote. I think that we as a society should be allowed to make that demand on the citizen, because we all have to live under your vote. See what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's an old idea, really, isn't it? With that's come from the ancient philosophers about how democracies are always doomed to turn into. I think you actually mentioned this in one of your videos about how they're always doomed to the big question of just appealing to the masses with, I guess, in terms of wealth distribution. It's always
and they have to. It's the law of competition in politics.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not prepared to be a revoltingly manipulative, ruthless brute and talk complete crap, and your competitor is, you're out, your competitor's in. And they use that as their rationalisation. I think even quietly in a private discussion forum. No, I think it was on his blog, actually. Don Brash admitted that. He said, believe it or not, politicians should do exactly what they think their voters want them to do. And he said they rationalise whatever it is they're doing, even when they know it's bullshit, they shouldn't really be doing it. They say to themselves, well, at least we're not as bad as the other lot.
Yeah.
Law of competition.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
It almost seems like let's say he did have multiple states. It could be a self-correcting situation, because people can just vote with their, like, if they like the laws in one of the states, they can just leave and go to live there, and then
Absolutely. How you should never, I've always, like, I call it the missing link, is foot voting, which is probably the most powerful form of voting. Honestly, if New Zealand didn't have easy access to Australia, who knows what this country would look like right now? It could be a full-on bloody communist state for all we know. It's actually always put New Zealand under a huge pressure to not go too far with whatever it is they're doing, because all the youth are going to piss off.
interesting.
When we really open up these borders, who knows what kind of an exodus we're going to get from youth?
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a great, interesting point, actually. And so, what do you think about, like, I guess, in terms of constitutionality? Because one of my big criticisms that I always go on about is how the government broke. I guess in many ways, the current government is breaking our constitution and the little constitutional documents we have in terms of the Treaty of Waitangi and the Bill of Rights. They've breached both of them, essentially. So what's your views on that, and maybe how we can move forward?
From what I understand, the New Zealand Constitution, correct me if I'm wrong, is not binding. It's a guideline. It's like a lovely idea that everybody agrees we should try to live up to, but it's not like the American Constitution where, you cannot create a law in contradiction to it, or the Supreme Court will throw it in the bin.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a cameo constitution, and of course the government's going to piss all over it if they can. So we don't really have a constitution, from what I understand. Again, someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's long been my understanding of it. Should we have a solid constitution? Hell yes, you need one. Because democracy, at the end of the day, it's not power to the people, it's power to the majority. And you need to have constitutions to protect people, to stop, to make an extreme example, 51% legitimately voting to turn the other 49% into their personal slaves.
Yeah.
Would you agree we actually do that in New Zealand? I describe our housing market as housing situation as actually a democratic breakdown.
Wow.
Because, in effect, the homeowners are voting to not let young people build a house at fair value on the fringes of their city, because they want them to be forced instead to buy their house at severely overinflated value. And that, to me, is a shocking situation. It is the real situation that we've got, whether people front up to it or not, and that is a democratic breakdown. The minority, the non-homeowners, don't have less representation in democracy. They have no representation. How do you protect against that? Constitutions are supposed to help with that. So governments cannot pass laws that contradict the Constitution. And again, we don't have a true Constitution in New Zealand, as I understand. We need one.
So how do you think we should go about getting one?
Well, I suppose it has to become a big political issue. You need a political party, or someone of prominence that doesn't just get automatically slandered by the media, to stand up and say, for God's sake, let's create a real constitution, please.
Yeah.
But I think there could be issues with the Treaty of Waitangi now. I mean, it's this whole regurgitated Treaty of Waitangi thing and all this Māori rights activism, all that sort of thing. It's almost like it's designed to create just one hell of a political mess. You know what I mean? So we can't think of these straight down to earth terms.
Well, I think it comes down to interpretation. Like, from what I understood from the Treaty of Waitangi, is it doesn't single out any ethnicity in terms of having rights. It gives rights to all inhabitants, and this is what I think. I mean, it's kind of it does edge on conspiracy theory, but I feel like this narrative that the treaty is something that separates us I think it's wrong, and it's also perhaps deliberate.
Well, I agree with you because it has to be wrong. I mean, what kind of a madman believes you can run a nation effectively with two different standards of citizenship under one umbrella? It's absolutely ridiculous. It was, as I understand it, the Treaty of Waitangi was meant very much to be a union, one people, not a partnership. Partnership means two separate people working together. No, it's a union. It's one people under one law for all, because that's what it needs to be. I mean, if Māori separatists as a group really do want to have their own systems, their independence, their own laws or whatever, fine. What they need to do, though, is to do the separation properly and secede. Build their own country, totally independent country out of the New Zealand Islands and move to it, if that's where they're at, if that's what they want. But so the original meaning of the Treaty of Waitangi must have been for a union, because everybody gets that. I think it's something to do with the Treaty of Waitangi Act that happened in 1975, which opened up a can of worms for a whole new different interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi, and we've never looked back. We just have created a political monster out of it. And it gets worse and worse and worse as more and more people profit from it. That's how I understand it anyway.
That's fascinating, because I've also heard about the Constitution Act, which essentially was a type of coup that was undercover that happened. Do you know about that?
No, I don't. Speak away.
I don't actually know too much about it, but apparently that a whole lot of things in terms of this, I guess, parliamentary sovereignty was, I don't know if it was created, but that's, I think, I always describe it as the parliament essentially is just, it's like its own kingdom, and we're essentially, in terms of the government, in terms of the law, where, I guess, at the whim of what the majority decides in terms of basically they can walk over our basic human rights. Although things haven't been that bad yet, but they seem to be heading that way.
A pure democracy, which I don't agree with, and no one in their right mind should agree with. That's what it sounds like that we have. Without a constitution, that's pretty much how I see New Zealand. A pure democracy.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, it's the cohesiveness of our society is dependent on people being decent. Because when the minority in a democracy, of course, as I said before, has no representation, then you have to hope that the majority doesn't vote to completely, screw you up the backside.
Yeah. So what do you think about Hipuapua? It kind of ties in with the current conversation about the Maori, the Treaty of Waitangi question, and how it's being misinterpreted, and also how democracies can go astray.
I mean, to be honest, I read hardly any of that. I did cursory level because I've just seen so much of it as time goes past. It honestly gets depressing. It's like, will it ever end? You know what I mean? There's more and more segregation, political segregation of Māori.
Yeah.
So I really can't comment on it because I just groan nowadays. I don't want to have to look at another case. You know what I mean?
I guess just the amount of stuff that this government, the Labour government, have been doing that really changes fundamental aspects of the country, and they speed up. They're speeding up. Like there's more and more and more and more and more.
Absolutely. I've noticed that as well. It's just a freaking circus. The Labour what's going on in there at the moment, and it's sick. So many things that they're doing, like pushing for hate speech laws, of course. I mean, who bloody asked for that, really? Other than a tiny minority that was having a few tears over being bullied or whatever. Nobody was asking for it, yet they're hell-bent on driving it through. And it makes you wonder what the hell's going on. You know what I mean?
Well, what's
Where do these
also
people get off with pushing it?
yeah, well, I
Carry
think
on.
that's definitely valid questions, and I mean, a lot of people would speculate and say that there's well, it's not really speculation to say that there's heavy communist Chinese influence in this country, but I've also seen a big push for even pre-crime policing in terms of the hate speech. A lot of like the I saw a List MP, Marja something. She quoted one of the Muslim community after the shooting. He said that hate speech.
Yeah.
He said hate speech leads to hate crime. And so this is a call, like when you think about it, hate speech leads to hate crime, therefore hate speech should be outlawed. This is pre-crime policing, which is a Chinese communist tactic.
Yes. Well, it depends on the context they mean it. So it sounds to be like they should treat it. Well, yeah. What I see with that, my take from it, is that they're trying to create the excuse to get people to justify hate speech laws.
Mm.
Know what I mean?
In terms
And
of,
the leftists always do this, sweeping associations.
do you think it's to try to stop people from criticizing them?
Hate speech laws? I think that the real purpose of hate speech laws is not to shut down real Nazis who have hateful views, because they're not a threat to anyone. We all know they're a joke. Those true extremists.
Mm.
It's to shut. I think it must be to shut down people who have serious, level-headed arguments against whatever it is the government wants to do.
Mm.
That's what I think.
I guess a good example would be Julian Assange. Like, what do you think about the West's? I guess it's a global issue, like the global Western world. What do you think about the fact that the West does have political, like, has imprisoned journalists now?
I have to say, haven't followed him hardly at all. I haven't had any real interest in it, so I can't really comment on that. I haven't thought about it too much.
Yeah, no, all good. I guess I got a question here. Just to comment, like, what are your thoughts on the current state of the media? I mean, I guess you've already commented briefly on that, but just in general, the state of New Zealand media in terms of how.
I think.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the state of the New Zealand media. It's. I think half of it is they don't give a shit. Once again, competitive forces. They don't give a shit about the truth. They need to stay in business and they need to create sensationalism. And goodies and baddies is what sells, not grey zones.
Mm.
And so they will butcher anyone to create a story, because the truth is the public is more interested in tabloid than news. Or what they're really interested in is tabloid while thinking it's news. So I think a lot of it's that. But they're obviously also, you see heaps of American where it's so extreme and obvious. You see hit jobs all over the place. Like when you listen to certain politicians in Complete and you get to see what they're saying, and then you see the media article afterwards, it's unbelievable. They have no shame and they have incredible power. And here's another interesting thing to remember as well. I think 90% of the people will look at a headline and only the headline of an article. They won't read the article.
Mm.
And how many headlines have you read that create an impression of a truth being in one certain direction, and then you bother to read the article and realize that it was enough, your impression that you got from the headline was completely wrong once you get to the end of it.
Yeah, well, I guess that leads to my
And
next.
remember, 90% of people only read the headline.
Mm. That leads to my next.
We've got that going on.
Sorry, what were you?
Carry on. Sorry.
Well, I guess that leads to my next question, which kind of I guess touches on themes that we've already discussed. But it's really like, what's your opinion on the schooling system and maybe how we, like, in education in general, and what we can be doing better?
Oh God, that's a huge topic, the one that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Basically, I think the government should come right out of schooling altogether, and we shouldn't worry too much about it at all. Because what we do know, and this based on identical twin studies in America, multiple identical twin studies, is that the only things that really matter in the end for your child's scholastic achievement is child abuse and genes. So you can make them, but you can't. Sorry, you can break them, but you can't really make them. Reading is extremely important, teaching kids the phonetic structure of language right from the beginning. But after that, it doesn't really matter too much. Like if you've got a kid that's just totally slack, wants to play all the time, and is severely behind in their schooling, if they've got a healthy mind, if they haven't been abused, they will catch up to whatever they need to catch up to in a very good time. And that's actually been observed in schools in America that are like, I can't remember what names they call these sort of schools, but where the kids can do absolutely whatever they like. It sounds crazy, letting them run free, do whatever they like, but they have no problem as a group mastering their academics in perfectly good time, just like everybody else, which actually is a huge challenge to the idea that we need to institutionalize learning as we do. And I think that education, tertiary education especially, needs to move much, much closer to the apprenticeship model, because that's the best way by far to avoid irrelevance and get people producing and working sooner and not wasting time in unnecessary education. So that's a very fast rundown on my perspective of it.
Fascinating. So you think, so that's you touched on a few interesting things there in terms of, I guess, starting off with, I guess, a hands-off approach with the government. I mean, would you say it could be in terms of a competitive model where maybe if the government was a little bit more hands-off, then schools could compete for their students?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why not? Why not just let parents play the game, and then they can send their kids to whatever educational philosophy they like?
Yeah.
I mean, the only time I think you can argue for the state to come in and help out is, and I think the state should do this, because many families are very, very far from perfect, to watch out for abuse of kids.
Yeah.
Might be a little bit intrusive, but I think they should do that anyway, because if they don't, who is going to do it? And to look out for any real developmental problems, and then they can come in and step in and spend a bit of cash on special needs cases when and as required. But other than that, yeah, totally hands-on, free market all the way.
What do you think about ACT's suggested policy to give the education allowance, I guess, that the government has to the parents so that they can just choose what to do with that money?
I agree with it. I mean, I would far prefer to see that than what we have now, so I like that policy in itself. But with respect to my ultimate ideal, it doesn't go anywhere near far enough. I would rather see people hold on to their taxes and not get any educational allowance at all until it's specifically needed for special needs cases as part of the welfare system. And if you did that, what you would find, I think, is that for primary and secondary school level education, people just get together with friends and form homeschooling clubs, and they'll sort it all out, no worries, especially when they learn the basic facts on what really matters for a child's long-term success. And it's not doing all that, going back to my schooling, agonizingly tedious crap for years and years.
Yeah.
Do
you think that might...
to relax.
Do you not think that might disadvantage the poorer communities in terms of education?
There's no reason for it to. I mean, look what we've got now with the internet and all the videos and everything that's free. My God, you can learn whatever you want so easily.
Yeah.
It's so easy. Basically, education is not a money game. It's a myth, really. I mean, even the New Zealand Initiative has done studies which highlights that people think they're taking their kids to really good schools, and what it's really got is just really advantaged students who are under, quite bluntly, high expectations, high pressures from their parents to succeed. But when you extract those factors, there's really often no difference between so-called low-performing schools and high-performing schools. I don't think it would disadvantage poor kids at all for any good reason. If those poor kids are disadvantaged, it's going to be because of the correlation between poverty and abuse.
Yeah,
that's going on. The abuse will definitely disadvantage them. That's the huge big factor, which nobody in politics likes talking about.
Yeah. Do you think that a standard curriculum is needed?
I think there should be a standard curriculum. Well, not necessarily curriculum, but there should be certain basic goals, or that that kids, well, standards that kids need to reach on the most basic things, like your maths, your English, especially your English, maybe a little bit on science, and one thing I'd like to see introduced on a more compulsory level, because there should be some compulsion there, as light-handed as possible, is civics, like how politics works in your society, how economics work, because a bit of economic literacy would go a heck of a long way to stopping people to vote for socialism based on share
totally.
Things like that.
Well, basic economics is not hard.
It should be very. Oh, it isn't hard. Not on the level that's practical that people need to know about.
Yeah.
But there should be some core compulsion so that they can do a decent vote reasonably well, whatever. But I think it should be super light-handed. And that's all the government should worry about. Other than that, just let them do whatever the bloody hell they want, excluding special needs cases.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Yeah, I definitely agree with. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But also civics. I mean, that was my biggest complaint, I guess, about my education through the school system is they don't teach you one thing about how the government works and how.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, when you understand the basics of like how economic development works, which is what I think should be taught, it's like. Well, shit, when you realise how important it is and how fundamental it is to the society you're living, it's like, why the bloody hell wasn't I told this at school?
Yeah.
I should have been. Why did I have to learn it by myself when it's so important?
I mean, I push it to a stage where I'm also almost sceptical that it's being left out of people's education on purpose, so that people...
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean... So, yeah, I won't go into that much, but
Have you heard of Arthur, what's his name? John Taylor Gatto?
No.
You might want to Google for that name later on. He's really interesting with some of the videos and books.
What was the last name?
Gatto. Gatto. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell it.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for the recommendation. I'll look into.
Yeah.
So universities. I mean, you talked about it a bit. They cost a lot. They're putting kids in debt straight away as they get into their life when they could be maybe getting into debt for starting a business or learning a trade. And also there's a theme in school that if you don't go to university you're going to end up being a loser or stuff like that. It's a big theme, I guess, that I experienced at least. And they're also, like you commented, they take up a lot of your time that could be productive. And so do we need to have a university-style structure that comes in earlier in education?
I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I think this is what I would like to see people do. Like, say you are interested in becoming a doctor, medical professional, or something like that. I like the idea of you starting out at the bottom, doing whatever. Then, as your interest builds, you can do online courses or practical courses. As it goes on, a personalised apprenticeship format for growing into whatever career you want that's right for you. So it's very organic and very in context, and it should expand out like that. So I think the online learning model is best. I don't think we should be worrying about degrees and advanced degrees because, I mean, it's like, why? Why not just learn what you need to learn rather than getting little labels or goal points?
Yeah.
And put it on your CV. You can show what you've done, and it should basically, with the internet as a base. I mean, obviously you're going to need to do still practical classes with those things. You should be able to learn what you need to learn, evolve it with your career. Just move much closer to the apprenticeship format because I think that's the only way that we can avoid waste.
Yeah.
With education.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the whole idea of a qualification, even though a lot of the time people that get these high-level qualifications often have to then essentially do an apprenticeship when they start their new job.
Well, the thing is, I mean, the human brain is designed to learn in context. I don't think we truly learn anything properly until we're working with it and thinking about it in a real way. I mean, you look at all these kids going to uni, they're under so much pressure to quickly do all their work. How much time do they have to really digest what they're learning, to really learn what they're learning? And you've got to ask yourself, I think that's why I think one of the reasons also is why learning in an apprenticeship format, when and as you need to expand, is probably going to be so much more effective because, you're going to really digest it because you understand, you appreciate what it really means because it's so real. You know what I mean? And relevant to you.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for those comments. I guess I've got one general last question. What do you think about, I guess, the place for religion in politics or in society? Yeah.
Religion, God, it's another one I could talk about forever. It's all good fun. Well, politics, I think, should be completely, secular. A place for religion in society?
Or maybe like in the state. Is there a place for religion in the state, I guess, is one aspect of the question.
In my opinion, I don't think so. I think most sane people who haven't been, ripped to bits from the earliest days of childhood and turned into some kind of Hitler, don't need to be taught morality. They already get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you can trust people to be decent without specifying a religion. Okay. I mean, whether or not religion's going to be destructive, or not, it probably depends on the religion. I think Christianity, for example, is pretty damn benign and harmless, but Islam with their Sharia law, holy shit, get that out of my government, So it all depends. But generally speaking, I've never really been attracted to the idea of associating religion with government at all myself.
I've just been thinking about it because, I've seen some communistic tendencies in the current government, and the current theme across communist states, as I'm sure you are aware, is atheism essentially, and they do attack religious freedom and so
that's totally different.
What do you think about that?
On that level, no, I don't like that one bit. Well, I can understand. Look, one thing I do believe in is anti-cult laws. That is because I think it's a violation of human rights for people to bring their kids up into their faith where those kids do not have the opportunity to make their own decision as to whether or not they're going to be part of that faith.
Yeah.
Their own decision to agree, their own right to agree or disagree with their parents' faith. I think that's a contradiction on human rights. So I think there's a place for the state to interfere a bit on that level. But when it tells people, what they have to believe, what they have to believe atheism, if they're involved in a essentially harmless religion that doesn't have an agenda to, blow people up or anything like that, definitely they should get the hell out of it, basically. And you're right. I've noticed that about communist states. They're curiously right into atheism. Yeah, very curiously.
Well, I guess just on what you've said about cults and stuff. One thing I've been interested in this, and I've been looking at, and I guess my argument is that even if you're not a cult cannot be overtly religious. So communism, I would say, is a type of cult, or another cult could possibly be I don't know, maybe it's a type of secret society, but it's a child being brought up in a family that's, let's say, part of a cult. It's not really. It's really hard to define those boundaries. Would you say?
Yes. I suppose it is a very, very difficult territory, of course. But basically, what I see as a cult, with the hallmark of it, is isolation, where the members are isolated from other people. So there's only one way to think and only one thing to believe, which is internally controlled.
Yeah.
So you're probably right. Communism could be a cult. I mean, well, it is in China. The way they isolate themselves with their internet and all the rest from the rest of the world, that's cult. And of course, North Korea is the perfect example of an entire national cult as well. Yeah.
So is just religious freedom the thing that we, in a way, because it's hard because a lot of, I think Christianity in New Zealand has been discredited a lot because I think the church, I mean, a lot of people say the churches did it to themselves. I guess, I mean, there is a big Christian community as well. But
Yeah.
would you just say, just in general, freedom of religion is just something that the state needs to continue reviving?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't interfere with people's beliefs unless the beliefs are truly concerning. So, like, they've got it's a religion that says, we're going to one day take over the world and blow people up to the end of it if we have to, silly stuff like that.
Yeah.
But a harmless religion, a clearly harmless religion, the state should basically get the hell out of it. I totally agree with that.
And so I guess maybe not on the state level, but just on a community level, what do you see that there is a role for religion that maybe is lacking or whatever?
Personally,
yeah,
I honestly think that it's important, probably is important for people to have a religion or as I say, a religious philosophy on things, because the atheistic belief, which in itself is a religion, because they're saying, this is how everything is when they don't know. It's actually a very dark belief. It's a belief in absolute death and the ultimate meaninglessness of everything. And I am suspicious that you need to have a certain kind of, it's healthy to have a certain kind of spirituality or religion in a sense to bring ultimate meaning, to relate the ultimate meaning of everything to. And when that's taken away, I'm suspicious that it creates, in some ways, a more trivialized mind. I'm a pretty waffly on that because I'm not totally sure, but
yeah,
there's religion. It's something that we look at and think about on a sociological level because it's a very, very powerful thing. I mean, people will, en masse, will die for it, won't they? So it's fascinating in its own right. In that sense.
Well, that's fascinating that and I completely agree with you that, and it's fascinating though that you do acknowledge that atheism in itself is a religion. A lot of atheists will deny it, and so what do you think is this kind of the aspect of atheism that conceals itself even as a belief system?
Well, the way I see atheism, and just looking at atheists, is they're saying there is no God, there is no afterlife. They're basically materialists. They believe that everything boils down to atoms and molecules banging into each other. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought with that one, what I was going to say. Well, that's what they are, but it is a religion because they think that that's all that there is, and that's bullshit in the sense that they don't know that. There could be so much more, but they say, no, that's it. So that's their faith. You know what I mean? And they're holding on to that.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Suspicious.
But why do they not see that in themselves? Why do they not see that? Because a lot of atheists I'll talk to, I'll tell them that they still believe in a religion, but they just are believing. Because a lot of them will say that, no, I don't believe in a religion. I don't believe in a religion. But that's also a belief. Would you say?
It is. Well, they're saying I believe in what I don't ultimately know.
What do you mean?
They don't know what it's a faith. To say there is, for example, no God is a faith because they do not know. There is profound mystery out there, you know what I mean, of things that we don't understand and can't even begin to understand. We can't even begin to understand consciousness or how anything came to be in the first place.
Yeah.
So rather than saying, look, I don't know, they form this faith, this rigid faith of atheism. And I believe, I'm suspicious, I'm wildly speculating, I suppose, that the real motive behind that is because they want to put it, the whole question, all these, spiritual questions, if you like, in a box, a simple, rigid box, which allows them to just throw it away and not think about it anymore because they're afraid to think about it because of the implications of what they think they believe. And that boils down to a fear of absolute death, because atheism is a fear, an incredibly morbid faith. It's actually the faith in absolute death at the point of death.
Yeah, well,
so
that's fascinating, and would you also say that there's maybe, I guess, in terms of how this plays out on a state level, that this amplifies a type of arrogance that a government can have?
Yeah, because if there is no God, then the closest thing to it is you, isn't it?
Or the government, yeah.
You rationalise. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry, as though you're the government. And yeah, like I remember John Key saying more than once that he doesn't believe in an afterlife. And I sometimes wonder if he doesn't believe in an afterlife because the thought of having to be accountable for all this dodgy shit, he can't stand. I mean, there's a part of us that knows when we're turning our back on our better judgment whenever we're doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like a fear of ultimate accountability, maybe. I mean, but that's what I see with these people who don't want to play the game in their mind, at least, of absolutely believing there's no God, even though they don't know. It's because they don't want there to be a God. They want the kind of freedom, mental freedom that comes from not having to give a shit about anything like that or think about anything like that, so they can do whatever the hell they want. You know what I mean?
And how does this play? Like, how does this also interact with science and also scientism? Science being abused for, not actually being scientific, but being abused in terms of almost being turned into a religion, and hand in hand with atheism.
I think real science is not a-religious at all. I think atheism hijacks the brand of science to legitimize itself. But when it comes to real science, I don't think science has anything specifically to do with atheism. Science does not validate atheism at all.
Yeah, that's fascinating that you call it a brand. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess. Oh, sorry.
Carry on. Sorry.
I kind of just wanted to touch on one thing. I mean, I guess it is personal. I would say that I call myself like a Christian, and I believe that God exists, but I also don't believe in an afterlife. And I guess that's more just I'm trying to come from like a pragmatic point of view, and also it makes sense that when you die because that's what it looks like this happens. But would you what do you I know maybe it might be a bit of a weird question, but is there some kind of inconsistency that I'm not seeing, or like?
Well, I've done a video on this called. I'll tell you what it's called in just a fraction of a second. You might want to watch it for your own curiosity sometime.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do that. Here we go. Consciousness and religion. So if you ever want to see my view in detail, you can check that out.
That's on your YouTube, right?
That's on my YouTube channel. You'll find that under the Building Utopia YouTube channel if you just scroll down 3 years ago.
Sweet.
But what are you missing? What about...
Just like a... Oh, sorry.
A huge... Sorry, there's just so much to say. And I'm just trying to see how I can compress it.
Yeah, never mind.
But what it boils down to is that the idea that subatomic particles banging into each other, dead as a doornail in themselves, forming a giant pinball machine can somehow experience itself is intrinsically absurd to the human mind. Where is the consciousness based? Because that's what it boils down to. Is it based on the mind, or is it based on the field behind it? We don't know. Although there's apparently a lot of interesting evidence to suggest that it might not be based on the brain. Like your brain could be a bioelectric e-book that your consciousness somehow logs onto. A bit like the Avatar movie. You remember that? Did you watch that?
Yeah.
He logged onto the ugly blue, green, whatever it was, creature.
Yeah.
If that is no more unreasonable than the idea of your brain generating a consciousness, which for a lot of reasons I believe makes absolutely no sense at all. But shit, I mean, to explain those arguments here, my God, I can't.
Oh yeah. And I guess
it's all there if you want to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess like ultimately like these kind of ideas come into the realm of the unknown, which is the vast majority of things, of course, that people are, like just in general, people, including me and everyone, like where there's so much that we're still not aware of, and it's guaranteed that you're always not going to be able to know what's happening in its entirety. So, but
True. Like psychologists, for example, have known they offer you would have heard them referring to consciousness as being like the non-locality of consciousness, as non-local.
oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah,
You speak of it. Yeah, what are they talking about? They talk about the fact that every time a different set of neurons, in effect, fires up in your brain in a different location, it's effectively a completely different brain with the same person.
fascinating.
Yeah, see what I mean?
Yeah,
So where the hell is the consciousness? Shouldn't it be a different person when a whole set of neurons stops firing and another set of neurons fires up? No, it's the same person experiencing a different part of the brain. So you're like reincarnating, so to speak, inside your own brain all the time. Where's the consciousness? Yeah.
well, I also heard another theory about consciousness as, I guess it's the nervous system in your body that's kind of reacting to the world, and it has to be, because the world's not anything predictable, it has to be something that's able to adapt to a non-predictable environment, which it's just something I think it was Jordan Peterson was explaining something like that, but it's just a theory. But hey, look, thanks so much for joining. I know that we're kind of heading towards the end of our time. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and
No worries. I enjoyed it too. Thank you.
yeah, and you've got some, so just for everyone listening, so you're Andrew Atkin, and so you've got a website, andrewatkin.blogspot.com.
Building Utopia. What I put on all my ideas for social progress.
Yeah, that's great. And
If they Google search Building Utopia and Andrew Atkin, if they're interested in all my ponderings, they'll find a lot of material there nowadays, which I've built up.
that's awesome. And so is it just the website and YouTube, your main, and you've got your Twitter?
YouTube. That's all I've been doing essentially. Yep.
Yeah.
And my Facebook page, I suppose.
All right. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for the conversation. Enjoyed, and hope perhaps interested to talk in the future as well.
Maybe. No worries.
Cool.
And thanks for having me on.
No problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cheers.
Rightio. See you later then.
See ya. Bye bye.